Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good morning colleagues. Welcome back. Seventh meeting of the Third Committee at the 78th session of the General Assembly is called to order. I invite the committee to begin its consideration of agenda item 25 entitled Advancement of Women and its sub-item A, Advancement of Women, and sub-item B, Implementation of the outcome of the 4th World Conference on Women and of the 23rd Special Session of the General Assembly. Documentation under agenda item 25 and its sub-items is listed in today's journal. Colleagues, as is our practice, the list of speakers under this item will be closed at 1 p.m. today, and the deadline for the submission of draft proposals under the item is 1 p.m. on Tuesday, 17 October. I would now like to welcome the Director of Strategic Partnerships Division of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and Empowerment of Women, Mr. Daniel Seymour. Participants wishing to make comments and pose questions to the speaker are invited at this time to press their microphone button within the next 3 minutes, after which the list will be closed. The time limit for each speaker will be announced before the floor is given to the first speaker. I now invite the Director of Strategic Partnerships Division to make an introductory statement. Mr. Seymour, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Chair of the Third Committee, members of the Bureau, distinguished delegates, UN colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to introduce 4 reports of the Secretary General under this agenda item. I'm going to be telegraphic, obviously, given our constraints on time. First is the report of the SG on violence against women migrant workers, that's A/78/292. This report found that while migration can promote the agency and economic empowerment of women, the lack of safe and regular migration pathways paired with restrictive migration and labour laws increases the risks for women migrant workers to violence. These risks of exploitation or abuse of women migrant workers are rooted in persistent gender inequalities, multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, all exacerbated by crises you're familiar with, COVID-19, extreme poverty, as well as increasing anti-migrant rhetoric and nationalist populism. The report found that although several member states reported strengthened efforts on the collection and analysis of data on violence against women, including on trafficking in persons, there are still persistent gaps in the collection and dissemination of sex disaggregated data, specifically on violence against women migrant workers. It noted measures undertaken to improve migrant women's access to justice by raising awareness of public officials and strengthening the capacity of women migrant workers to understand and exercise their rights. The report concludes, as all of these 4 reports do, with a set of recommendations for consideration by the General Assembly. These outline concrete measures which can be taken by member states to eliminate violence and discrimination against women migrant workers and enhance their access to justice, services, decent work and social protection. Let me move swiftly then to the second report of the SG on improvement of the situation of women and girls in rural areas, that is A/78/220. This reviews policy and programme efforts by member states to improve the situation of women and girls in rural areas, given overlapping crises that have compounded rural poverty, food insecurity, and gender inequalities. The report finds significant commitment to increasing rural women's economic empowerment, participation and leadership in decision and policy making, and improvement of gender statistics and disaggregated data. It notes promising initiatives on improving the situation of women and girls in rural areas, and these could be scaled up for widespread and lasting change. It argues for renewed efforts to enact, fund and implement economic and social policies to improve rural women's and girls' food security and nutrition, and address the inadequate social protection coverage, mitigate escalating unpaid care and domestic work responsibilities, and build climate and environment resilience. It calls for systematic attention on rural women and girls' access to land, water and other natural resources, because rural development policies and programs that address climate and environment and financial challenges will build their resilience. Again, the report concludes with recommendations for consideration by the General Assembly. The third report is on the improvement in the status of women in the UN system. That's A/78/206. It shows overall representation of women in the professional and higher categories increasing from 45.3% in 2019 to 47% in 2021. And we now have, and I'm sure you'll join us in celebrating this, parity at headquarters locations for women's representation. Gender parity among Under-Secretary Generals and Assistant Secretary Generals, as well as among resident coordinators, was maintained during this last reporting period, and thanks very much to the Secretary General's leadership, there have been a number of very important great strides towards gender parity, including through policy initiatives such as those relating to enhanced parental leave. However, overall progress has been uneven. Women remain underrepresented at middle or senior management levels, and also in non-headquarters locations, and this is particularly true in mission settings. Excellencies, gender parity, as you know, is not only about numbers, but also about transforming organizational culture, and the report highlights good practices in this regard that can be found in the Enabling Environment Guidelines for the UN system, and in the field-specific guidelines which we're proud to have produced in UN Women. Also, the network of about 500 UN gender focal points plays a vital role in enhancing gender parity, and we continue to lead and coordinate this crucial network. And again, as per the other reports, there are recommendations for consideration by the General Assembly. Finally, the report of the Secretary General on measures taken and progress achieved in follow-up to and implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and the outcome of the 23rd Special Session of the General Assembly, that is A/78/216, is concerned with the extent to which selected intergovernmental processes of the United Nations integrate a gender perspective. It focuses on resolutions of the General Assembly and the ECOSOC and its functional commissions, as well as the reports of the Secretary General that are written for these bodies, and it provides a quantitative and qualitative assessment of progress achieved compared with previous years. The report provides an overview of contributions by UN Women on the integration of a gender perspective in such bodies, including the work with the Commission on the Status of Women. Finally, the report contains recommendations for further measures to enhance the implementation of gender equality mandates throughout the work of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
I thank the Director of the Strategic Partnerships Division of UN Women. Now we'll open the floor for questions or comments to Mr. Seymour. I ask delegations to limit their comments to 2 minutes, and I thank you for your kind cooperation. The first 5 speakers on my list are the following: United States, Latvia, Romania, Poland, and Colombia. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. We also extend our thanks to Director Seymour for your presentation today. UN Women plays a critical role in addressing the most pressing global challenges of our time. The global pandemic, ongoing instability and conflict, and continued acts of aggression and oppression have caused substantial backsliding in gender equality and global progress towards Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is key to the 2030 Agenda. We believe this regression will have a cascading effect on all people and in every sector. In particular, the loss of progress on gender equality front undermines the full enjoyment of human rights for everyone. This has been particularly noticeable in women's access to needed health care. All human rights apply equally to all individuals, regardless of gender. Without full respect for human rights for every individual, democratic principles are undermined, fundamental freedoms are eroded, and the rule of law is co-opted to support those in power at the expense of citizens. We're especially concerned with the potential for intensification of multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, particularly with the rise of emerging technologies. Such discrimination disproportionately impacts women and girls in all their diversity, indigenous persons, persons with disabilities, and persons of African descent, among other underserved groups. We thank UN Women for its sustained work to advance gender equality to the benefit of all, and for those standing against the backsliding of gender equality everywhere. Madam Executive Director, how will UN Women prevent further backsliding in women's advancement globally? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States and give the floor to Latvia.
Thank you, Chair. Director Seymour, thank you for your presentation, and I'll be rather brief. I commend UN Women for its dedication to create an environment in which every woman and girl can exercise her human rights and live up to her full potential. This mission requires partnerships with governments, civil society, businesses, foundations, and individuals. Latvia praises projects UN Women have realized through partnerships. In Rwanda, your partnerships with governments and businesses made safe public spaces projects possible. In Ukraine, your partnerships with Peace and Humanitarian Fund and local Ukrainian funds stimulated women-led humanitarian assistance. Often, challenging circumstances on the ground have demanded from UN Women innovative partnership strategies, notably working amid the Taliban's edicts and decrees that have aimed to erase Afghan women and girls from public life. Latvia firmly supports UN Women in its mission and strives to contribute its share by engaging in partnerships of its own to make a positive impact. Through partnerships, we've established a rehabilitation facility in Ukraine to support survivors of sexual violence perpetrated by the Russian military. In Namibia and Zambia, we have empowered local women by helping them to start businesses and use digital tools. And in Uzbekistan, supporting participation of Uzbek women in the IT business sector and their access to public life. Director Seymour, I would like to inquire, in your extensive work experience, which have been the most challenging partnerships to forge, and what are the main obstacles that you face? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Latvia and give the floor to Romania.
Good morning. Romania welcomes the report of the Secretary General on the improvement of the situation of women and girls in rural areas. Romania reaffirms its commitment to defend all women's rights everywhere. We believe rural women are important agents of economic and social change. In 2023, in support of the empowerment of women from rural areas, the government of Romania launched a program to increase employment among women with lower levels of education in rural areas. Furthermore, Romania has implemented the Rural Action for Innovative and Sustainable Entrepreneurship for Youth project that assisted women to attain education and training and self-employment into sustainable agribusiness. Yet, women and girls from rural areas continue to face serious challenges because of gender-based stereotypes and discrimination that deny them equitable access to opportunities, resources, assets, and services. One of the recommendations in the report is for member states to take decisive action to eliminate the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and violence facing rural women and girls by addressing structural barriers and discriminatory social norms. Can you please mention measures that member states could take at grassroots level to fight embedded stereotypes and domestic violence, and therefore empower rural women in their communities and further support gender equality? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Romania and give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Monsieur le Président, la Pologne s'aligne sur la...
Chair, we align ourselves with this statement delivered by the European Union, and we add the following remarks on national capacity. Chair, the work of UN Women throughout the world to improve women's access to education and other services, as well as its activities to address sexual and gender-based violence, including in conflict situations, are laudable. Tragic consequences are entailed for women due to conflicts, which we see every day in Ukraine. This is done by due to the unjustified war by Russia against Ukraine, which has created 6 million refugees, many of which are women. Many of them are subject to the risk of human trafficking, sexual and gender-based violence, sexual abuse, and forced labor, just to cite a few examples. UN Women provides vital aid for these needs, both in Ukraine and beyond. That's why Poland has voluntarily supported this important work by allocating over $60 million to ensure safe services provided by UN Women in Ukraine and elsewhere. Director, what are the main priorities and objectives that UN Women has set for the coming year as regards its work for women and girls in conflict situations? Allow me to recall our candidacy for 2024 for the board of UN Women. Here we are looking forward to working together with everyone from UN Women and as well as the members of the Bureau and the Administrative Board to ensure a world that is more safe, inclusive, and just for women all over the world. Thank you.
The distinguished representative of Poland. Before giving the floor to Colombia, just let me read out the next speakers. It will be European Union, Chile, Mexico, and the Sovereign Order of Malta. I give the floor to Colombia.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Director, for your briefing. I'd like to refer to two of the reports that you've introduced today. The first is on violence against women migrant workers, and I'd like to recognize you to recognize, and I would recognize the work being done by Colombia to reduce and minimize violence against women migrant workers. In the second report has to do with the advancement of women and improving the situation of women girls in rural areas. And I'd like to thank you as well for recognizing efforts to improve the livelihoods of women in Colombia and financing for those women. I have comments on both those reports. The first is, how can you use the disaggregated data to better inform the public? One of our strategies has to do with the survey to determine how much time youth spend in rural areas carrying out domestic work and unpaid work. The second question has to do with the multiple and intersected forms of discrimination. This is terminology that's used frequently in these reports and others. It would be very useful if you could share with us a specific example in one of these reports where you've identified a specific form of discrimination against rural women or migrant women workers. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Colombia and give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to thank Mr. Seymour for today's presentation. Like other speakers before me have mentioned, women and girls' full and equal enjoyment of human rights is under increased pressure. Some recent examples include Ukraine, where women and girls face heightened risk of sexual and gender-based violence as a result of Russia's war of aggression. Afghanistan, where we are witnessing systematic violations of the human rights and fundamental freedoms of women and girls. And Sudan, where women and girls have been subjected to various forms of violence, including rape, sexual slavery, and sexual exploitation and abuse. UN Women plays an essential role through its normative, coordination, and operational work. We appreciate the positive results that you have been able to achieve through the implementation of this triple mandate and the strategic plan, especially in the current context of multiple crises and war. We appreciate that UN Women is not deterred by these crises, but continues to identify and address structural inequalities. UN Women's convener role is crucial for mobilizing our sustained attention and investment in gender equality, including through initiatives to follow up on the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. For example, the recent Generation Equality Midpoint Moment provided an important opportunity to take stock of the progress made and galvanize action in this regard. The EU fully supports the organization of a high-level event on Beijing Plus 30 in 2025. These events, in our view, provide opportunities to reaffirm our commitments and together rally around gender equality. Mr. Seymour, could we ask you, how will UN Women work to ensure that the Beijing Plus 30 events complements potential commitments and outcomes of next year's ICPD Plus 30? Thank you so much.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union. Give the floor to Chile.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Chile welcomes the role of UN Women in working on gender equality and the advancement of women. We also welcome the reports introduced by Director Seymour I'd like to refer to 2 points outside of the reports introduced, but we feel that they're relevant in this discussion. Firstly, we'd like to underscore the fact that older women make up the vast majority of the older population, and that number will increase in the coming years. And on that point, we would seek the support of UN Women and other delegations in helping older women and in recognizing the importance of gender policies. So outside of the areas where we traditionally work, one agenda item which is very important for our delegation is that we would ask UN Women how does the agenda item, the issue of unpaid care, how could that be a platform for cross-cutting gender policies in the economic and social sphere? We'd also ask UN Women what other opportunities can we take advantage of as member states to have a gender approach in discussions where that approach is still lacking. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Chile and give the floor to Mexico.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chairman. And I thank the representative of UN Women for introducing these reports. I'd like to express Mexico's gratitude for the work being done by UN Women to ensure gender equality. My country has always sought to have a strategic relationship with UN Women which would make it possible for us to cooperate in implementing projects together to benefit gender equality. One of the most important was the partnership to sustain the Generation Equality Forum. That's borne fruit, and we continue to work on that by following through on our commitments, such as for the General Alliance for Care. We recognize the importance of gender equality for women, teens, and girls in all of their diversity throughout the world, but also in a national context. We'd like to continue to promote a common agenda to share good practices, for example, in the area of statistics, care, protocol, variety, and political participation. And in this way, we would continue to build a country and a world which are more fair and balanced. So we would ask the following: how can UN Women work with Mexico to find ways of restructuring its feminist foreign policy? Additionally, how can UN Women work in a coordinated fashion with the UN system to ensure greater recognition of gender equality as a component for promoting human rights and sustainable development? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. Colleagues, before I give the floor to the Sovereign Order of Malta, we've had 2 more late inscriptions with Costa Rica and Italy. I've decided to accept them on exceptional basis, but could I please request you all in the future to respect the time that you can put your name on the speakers list, because it affects the time that everyone has to speak, and we won't manage the schedule otherwise. Give the floor to the Sovereign Order of Malta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. It is clear that empowering women should be at the forefront of our efforts. Our commitment extends to various regions across the globe. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, our Malteser staff provides counseling for a foundation established by women. This foundation supports women in social and economic fields, offering small credits for business startups and empowering them to take control of their lives and futures. In India, where slums are a stark reality, we've taken proactive approach to empower women living in these challenging conditions. Through training midwives, these women become frontline caregivers for their communities, improving health outcomes for themselves and those around them. More than 100 young girls between the ages of 15 and 19 are emerging as drivers of positive change in their communities. In partnership with the local organization Development for Education, we've received specialized training to become nutritionists and water, sanitation, and hygiene officers to share their knowledge with women and their girls in their community. An important and overlooked topic is menstrual hygiene and health. Every day, an estimated 300 million people menstruate, yet menstruation remains a taboo subject. Girls and women who have their periods are stigmatized and exclusion in many regions. Shockingly, 500 million women and girls lack access to the resources they need to manage menstruation with dignity and health. This limits their ability to participate in education and the workforce. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Order of Malta and give the floor to Costa Rica.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Costa Rica welcomes the briefing provided by the Director of the Division of UN Women for Partnerships, and you received the full support of my delegation for the work of UN Women. In particular, I'd like to refer to the report on measures taken as a follow-up to the Beijing Declaration. We believe there's a very important content in this report, in particular the quantitative analysis and qualitative findings of the resolutions and mandates for UN Women and in the UN system on gender equality. Here we have 328 resolutions and reports that include the gender perspective throughout the UN system. 33% of them come from the Third Committee. And we need to add to that the establishment of standards from the Commission on the Status of Women and the Board of UN Women. So we wonder how the UN is systematizing these mandates. Is there some kind of process to systematize these mandates and to report on them? We'd like to know as well, Director, how can we, the states, contribute to and support improving that alignment and synergies among the various mandates on the issue of gender equality? Thank you, Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Costa Rica and give the floor to Italy.
Mr. Chair, as youth delegates of Italy to the United Nations, we welcome the Secretary General report on the improvement of the situation of women and girls in rural areas. As per our mandate, our attention is particularly devoted to the protection and realization of the rights of young girls, and especially those living in rural areas, both in Italy and abroad. The gender gap in food insecurity still persists at a global level, as stated in the latest FAO report on the status of food insecurity and nutrition in the world. In particular, young women and girls living in rural areas are more likely to be food insecure than men due to socioeconomic factors related to agri-food systems, as also highlighted by the Secretary General call for action for accelerated food system transformation. Some of the recommendations contained in the report call for member states to develop and adopt gender-responsive strategies to support the resilience and adaptive capacities of young women and girls to respond to the adverse impacts of climate change, and to promote the progressive realization of the right to adequate food in the context of food security and nutrition for rural women. In light of this, we kindly ask the distinguished representative of UN Women, Director Daniel Seymour, to please share an example of best practice of how such strategies can promote the realization of rural girls' right to adequate food, considering both their gender-related and climate-related vulnerabilities. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Italy. I now give the floor back to Mr. Daniel Seymour to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, this is a wonderful set of extremely substantive questions, which I'm very, very happy to give some responses to. I'm just also aware of time, so Mr. Chair, you'll be strict with me, I'm sure. First of all, thank you very much for the kind words from many delegations for the work of UN Women. We appreciate it. We appreciate very much our relationship with member states as central partners to the work that we do and carrying out the mandate that was given to us by the General Assembly. The distinguished delegate of the United States, I just want to thank you particularly for reminding us of two crucial issues, one on technology, particularly in the context of the recent Commission on the Status of Women, and also disability. It relates to the issue of intersectionalities, which we'll come to in a moment. But you asked a complicated question, a difficult question about how we collectively prevent backsliding as UN Women. And I want to maybe suggest three areas among many. The first is that this issue requires a whole-of-system response as the United Nations. It affects all aspects of the lives of women and girls, all aspects of the implementation of the UN Charter, all aspects of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and various other standards that we all work together to implement. And it is through the coherent marrying of coordination, partnership, as well as operational activities, creating norms and standards in the intergovernmental space that we feel we can make progress. It's not adequate to focus only on one, and that's why we think that the mandate afforded us by the General Assembly was a very forward-looking one. Second is that we do think that obviously the challenges that we have in 2023 in addressing this are modern ones, and that they demand reaching out to a range of stakeholders, including the private sector, including faith-based organizations, civil society, and of course member states, in a sort of virtuous collaboration that draws on the capacities and the energies and the comparative advantage of all. And that's very much, and I noticed that a number of delegates raised the example of generation equality. This is the intent of that initiative, but many others too, and we feel that that is crucial in addressing that backsliding. We also, of course, require a range of actors to step up on this, in the intergovernmental space, but also in public spaces more generally, and that's an area for additional collaboration and consideration. And I think the crucial thing, and it relates to the question from the distinguished delegate of the European Union about Beijing plus 30, we will need collectively to find a highest common denominator, and our role as UN Women will be to facilitate that with member states as we try to commemorate in the appropriate way the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, the Beijing Platform for Action. It will be extremely important that we manage to achieve dynamics and collaborative dynamics among member states and groupings that lead us to the most positive outcomes in that process as possible. I think we're all aware that recent years have been challenging in the intergovernmental space to arrive at, for example, agreed conclusions in the Commission on the Status of Women. And we very much want to be working with you all in the context of Beijing plus 30 to find ways to get around that. The distinguished delegate of Latvia asked about the most challenging partnerships and the main obstacles. It's a great question. I think there are challenges inherent in all forms of partnership, and often that is our job as UN Women to work within those. For example, of course, you talked about difficult situations. Okay, thank you. With regard to Afghanistan and other places, but also, there are challenges inherent in working with the private sector, for example. There are certain challenges in terms of finding areas of collaborative advantage in terms of UN coordination. There are challenges with regard to working in the most effective way across the full range of member states. So challenges are inherent in our partnership work. It is core to our mandate, but that's our job, and that's what we work to work around. And in some ways, I think the challenges are very much around creating spaces for convening, facilitating and enabling collaboration between different kinds of stakeholders. Those are sometimes the bigger challenges than simply, as UN Women, finding productive bilateral partnerships with any particular group, constituency or individual partner. On the question from the distinguished delegate of Romania on measuring, let me just say we are very, very aware. It is a new element of our strategic plan and in the strategic framework for UN Women to focus specifically on social norms. We have the advantage that our friends and colleagues at UNFPA are in the same position with their strategic plan, and we're working together very much on that. There are numerous examples, for example, working with men and boys at the local level. There is an example of addressing issues at rural level through men's parliaments, and other groups which lead to development of local policies in countries like Senegal, and budgets to address women and girls' unpaid care and domestic work. But overall, we do face an enormous challenge with regard to stereotypes and norms, and I appreciate it being raised. For those that may have an interest, we have collaborated with a very large market research company, Kantar, to do a study of attitudes. It's now 20 countries covering both Global North, Global South, which shows a number of things on attitudes, and it's longitudinal, it's the second iteration. one of the things from that report, which I think we all need to be very mindful of, is that it shows that some of the most regressive attitudes with regard to gender equality and the cohort within which we're going most in the wrong direction is young men. And I think it reiterates the points that other colleagues have made about the importance of men and boys. Given availability of time, I'm going to have to defer. We can respond in writing to some of the other questions that were raised. I just want to touch maybe on the question from the distinguished delegate of Poland on priorities in crisis. Broadly speaking, we believe that there are two main things. One is the mainstreaming of gender equality through the process of crisis, that is through, for example, rapid gender assessments, providing the information necessary for the humanitarian community for crisis response. But we also believe that one of the most cost-effective life-saving interventions in the context of crisis is the empowerment of women. We believe that if you are concerned about under-5 mortality in crisis, if you are concerned about children going to school, if you're concerned about care of the elderly or those living with disabilities, getting money and resources and power into the hands of women in crisis-affected communities is the single most cost-effective way to save lives and help communities transition from crisis to stability. And that is at the core of our work in crisis, and you will hear that increasingly as we develop this more, including through our new membership of the Interagency Standing Committee. Apologies for having not been able to cover all of the questions, but I thank you very much for your attention and all those questions.
I thank the Director of the Strategic Partnerships Division of UN Women. I would like to welcome now the Chair of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, Ms. Ana Pérez-Narváez. Participants wishing to make comments and pose questions to the speaker, you are invited to press the microphone button now and within the next 3 minutes. After that, the list will be closed. The time limit for each speaker will then be announced before the floor is given to the first speaker. I know this is difficult, but thanks for your cooperation. Now I invite the chair of the committee to make an introductory statement. Ms. Pérez-Narváez, you have the floor.
Presidente.
Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, today is the first time that I have the immense honor to address and engage in an interactive dialogue with the Third Committee of the General Assembly in my capacity as the elected chair of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. In February, CEDAW elected a new bureau and welcomed 6 newly elected members. Over the past year, the committee held dialogues with 24 states parties in Geneva and adopted concluding observations on their reports, preventing a further increase of the committee's current backlog of 45 received state party reports that are pending review. In addition, it adopted 11 lists of issues in relation to reports from states parties and 12 lists of issues prior to reporting under the simplified reporting procedure. Of the 189 states parties to the CEDAW Convention, only 13 have opted out from simplified reporting procedure since the committee's decision in 2022 to make it the default procedure for the submission of periodic records. Under Article 2 of the optional protocol ratified by 115 states parties, CEDAW took action on 11 individual complaints. It found violations of the author's rights in 6 cases concerning violence against a disappeared girl, obstetric violence, non-refoulement, failure to provide gender-sensitive drug therapy and rehabilitation to a pregnant woman, continuing discrimination against women victims of sexual violence during World War II, and finally, a discrimination against a rural woman's human rights defender in a land dispute. Under Article 8 of the optional protocol, the committee conducted a confidential inquiry visit to a state party and adopted the assessment of the follow-up report received from another state party in response to an inquiry report. It also requested country visits in relation to several pending inquiry proceedings. On our work on general recommendations, in October of 2022, the CEDAW Committee adopted its general recommendation number 39, which provides guidance to states parties to implement their obligations under the Convention in relation to the rights of Indigenous women and girls. It acknowledges that Indigenous women and girls face intersecting forms of discrimination based on sex, gender, Indigenous status, and other factors, and calls on state parties to prevent, prohibit, and punish all forms of gender-based violence against Indigenous women and girls, including Indigenous women human rights defenders and environmental activities. It also calls on state parties to promote the meaningful and informed participation of Indigenous women and girls in political and public life. The Officer of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has translated General Recommendation 39 into several indigenous languages and will continue to do so through 2023. Currently, the committee is elaborating General Recommendation number 40 on the equal and inclusive representation of women in decision-making systems. Another draft general recommendation on gender stereotypes is on the horizon. CEDAW plans to adopt a concept note in its upcoming October session. I would also like to say that the working group on gender-based violence against women is working on a general recommendation number 35, which updates General Recommendation number 19 on violence against women. It approved the first two sections on conflict-related sexual violence and harmful practices, respectively. It also elaborated a position paper. Women, Peace and Security, the committee remains deeply concerned that sexual violence continues to be utilized as a means of warfare in armed conflicts across the globe. Recently, a UN mechanism approached CEDAW to request an exceptional report from a state party where conflict-related sexual violence, including exploitation of prostitution, is reportedly rampant in camps for IDPs. In October last year, the committee reviewed the 9th periodic report of Ukraine and issued recommendations to the state party to protect and promote women's rights in this challenging context of war. It offered technical assistance for the implementation of the recommendations to Ukraine, which extended an invitation to the committee to conduct a technical follow-up visit to the country. That will take place as soon as the necessary logistical and support can be ensured. In Afghanistan in January, CEDAW received a response from the de facto authorities in Kabul to its request for information on the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan. The information has been published on the CEDAW website and referred to in a recent report on the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan by the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation on the rights in Afghanistan. And it includes a report on discrimination against women and girls. The task force on Afghanistan closely consults with these and other relevant human rights mechanisms, including the Special Rapporteur on violence against women and girls. On harmonization of working methods, we have continued to work in this regard, and I'd like to say that in May, CEDAW and the Committee on the Rights of the Child, for the first time, held back-to-back dialogues with a state party offering joint recommendations in relation to issues affecting both committees, such as the rights of girls, child marriage, school dropout, and early pregnancy. I would also refer to the issue of working methods, that the committee is adopting a methodology for the examination of state party reports in the absence of a delegation, drawing on the practices of several other treaty bodies. And I know that I'm out of time, Chairman. I apologize. On treaty body strengthening process, obviously, after the 35th annual meeting of the chairs, the CEDAW committee acknowledged all of the decisions adopted there on behalf of the 10 human rights treaty bodies. Chairman, before concluding, I would like to thank our partners, including the interagency group, for the submission of reports, and that includes, of course, UN Women, Asia Pacific, ERA Asia Pacific, that brought local NGOs to our sessions, International Disability Alliance, and CERMI Women's Foundation. We had informal public meetings with NGOs. We thank all the national human rights institutions and civil society for their important contributions. Although the work of the CEDAW committee has become more complex, human and financial resources afforded by the member states of the United Nations have not kept pace with the growth of our work. And we therefore, if you will allow me, Chairman, would like to call on the General Assembly to approve additional resources to address the inadequate staffing levels to support the work of the human rights treaty bodies. It really is absolutely essential at a time such as this, when we see so much backsliding. On behalf of CEDAW, I thank you for this opportunity, and I stand ready to answer any questions you may wish to pose. Thank you.
I thank the chair of CEDAW, and I'm very sorry about the tight schedule that we have already. To all the panelists, it's very difficult, but we have such a loaded agenda. We somehow have to get through this, so thank you very much for the cooperation. I will now open the floor for any questions or comments to Ms. Palés-Narváez. And again, I would ask the delegations to limit their comments. This time it's 2.5 minutes, and I thank you for your cooperation in this regard. The first speakers on my list are the following: Japan, Greece, European Union, Switzerland, and China. I give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Palés-Narváez, for your informative briefing. Together with the CEDAW committee, the international community has made hard-won progress in elimination of discrimination against women for the past decades. Japan highly values the committee's efforts and expertise and is delighted that Dr. Akizuki Hiroko from our country was re-elected last year to serve as a member. I have two questions for you, Ms. Palés-Narváez. Firstly, as elimination of discrimination against women is the key to advancement of women, more interaction between the CEDAW committee and the third committee is necessary. Could you kindly share any ideas for possible collaborations between these two committees and your views on how state parties can cooperate? Secondly, we welcome ongoing reform of the committee's work. Could you kindly elaborate more on the positive impact of the simplified reporting that you have observed so far? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan and give the floor to Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since this is the first time I'm taking the floor, allow me to congratulate you and the Bureau members for your election and express our support to your work. Madam Chair, remaining committed to the full implementation of the CEDAW Convention, Greece implements a coherent legal and institutional framework which provides for mainstreaming a gender perspective across the whole range of public policies, domestic and foreign. The General Secretariat for Equality and Human Rights, under the newly established Ministry of Social Cohesion and Family, is the competent institution coordinating the coherent integration of the perspectives of gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics in the implementation of the work and priorities of the government. The National Action Plan on Gender Equality 2021-2025, which is fully aligned with the UN and EU gender equality framework, as well as the 2030 Agenda, sets the following main priorities: prevention and combating of gender-based and domestic violence, gender equal participation in the labor market in decision-making and leadership positions, as well as mainstreaming gender in sectoral policies. Madam Chair, as Greece is about to present its combined 8th and 9th periodic report to the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women at its forthcoming 87th session, we would like to know what member states could do in order to enhance gender mainstreaming in all UN policies and structures. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Greece and give the floor to the EU.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair of the CEDAW Committee, we thank you very much for the important work carried out by you and the very interesting presentation of your work today, in particular about the specific country situations. The European Union would like to take this opportunity to reiterate its call on all states who have not yet done so to accede to the CEDAW Convention, to fully implement the provisions laid down therein, and to review any reservations and withdraw those that are contrary to the object and purpose of the Convention. Madam Chair, I would like to make 3 short points in relation to your presentation. The first one is on participation. As you mentioned, we welcome the work conducted by the CEDAW Committee to elaborate a new general recommendation to provide state parties with guidance on reaching equal and inclusive representation of women in decision-making systems, both in the public and private sectors. The second one is on access to sexual and reproductive health. Conflict and crisis around the world continue to exacerbate the challenges and barriers facing women and girls globally, including access to sexual and reproductive health. The EU remains committed to the promotion, protection, and fulfillment of all human rights and to the full and effective implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action and the Program of Action of the International Conference on Population and Development and the outcomes of their review conferences, and remains committed to sexual and reproductive health and rights in this context. The third one is on tackling gender stereotypes. Studies show how gender stereotypes disproportionately impact women and girls, and this can also have a negative impact on families and communities at large. You mentioned that CEDAW will elaborate a new general recommendation. We welcome this and we very much look forward to the concept note. In this sense, acknowledging that many women and girls face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination based on additional grounds that may expose them to further marginalization in society, we ask you, what can states do to mitigate risks for women and girls in such vulnerable situations? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union and give the floor to Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président, la Suisse remercie.
Chair, Switzerland thanks the committee for its work. I will begin for a question of the chair of CEDAW. How can you ensure that new technologies will strengthen the participation of women in decision-making processes? There are growing threats to the right of women and girls in the world. In this context, Switzerland hails the vital role played by the CEDAW. Switzerland has the pleasure to announce the candidacy of Erika Schleppi, an attorney, for the forthcoming CEDAW session in 2023. We also welcome the work currently done by the committee to draft General Recommendation number 40. It is on equal and fair participation by women in decision-making bodies and on full, meaningful, and significant participation of women in decision-making processes, including in the digital space, which is vital for crafting just, inclusive, and peaceful societies. Now turning to the Women, Peace, and Women, Peace, and Security agenda. Switzerland wants to see women involved more in conflict settlement processes, and we want to see a stronger gender role in cybersecurity processes. We're currently implementing our 5th National Action Plan to implement Resolution 1530. Thank you.
Before giving the floor to China, I will read out the next 5 speakers: Mexico, Cuba, Norway, Malaysia, Russian Federation. I give the floor to China.
主席先生 Mr. Chair, China appreciates CEDAW's important role in eliminating all forms of discrimination against women and safeguarding women's rights and interests. We support the subcommittee in conducting and continuing constructive dialogue with the states parties within the mandate of the convention. As a signatory to the convention, China has been earnestly honoring its obligations to the convention. In May, we received the periodic review by the committee on the 9th compliance report, and we have conducted a fruitful dialogue with the CEDAW candidly and openly. China attaches great importance to gender equality and the all-round development of women. We have been improving our legal framework and established more than 100 laws and regulations. In this regard, we are implementing an all-round women development action plan to safeguard women's rights in health, education, employment, social security, family, and marriage, so that they can equally participate in economic and social development, equally enjoy the achievements of reform, so that they can have a higher sense of fulfillment, happiness, and security. China takes seriously the constructive recommendations by CEDAW and is implementing Beijing Declaration and the Program for Action earnestly. At the same time, in order to help the state parties to better implement the convention so that the articles of the convention can be better implemented, China hopes that the committee can honor its obligations and discharge its responsibilities effectively and equitably, and be facts-based and respect the information provided by the concerned countries, and discard ideological prejudice and avoid practices of politicizing human rights issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of China and give the floor to Mexico.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And I'd like to thank Ms. Pelaez Narvaez for her briefing. The multiple and intersected forms of violence and discrimination which women face, young women and girls face, not only damage those women, but they also impact the entire society. Global crises such as the issues of care and violence have affected people unequally. Mexico has shown its commitment to the work of CEDAW and the recommendations of the committee by setting up the commission to follow up on the CEDAW committee's observations. This commission has coordinated domestic efforts to comply with these recommendations and observations so that we can work towards a national gender equal perspective. We welcome the publication of Documentation 39 on the rights of indigenous women and girls. Mexico is proud to have been the host for the meeting of the Americas and National Dialogue. We would like to ask the following. What strategy does CEDAW believe is most effective so that we can avoid backsliding and sustain our gains and make sure that women, girls, and teenage women live free from violence and have full autonomy over all areas of their lives without being limited by discrimination and stereotypes? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico and give the floor to Cuba.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We are grateful for the briefing provided by the chair of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. That body is one that we are grateful for and we continue to support and have supported since its creation. We've always been proud to have been the first country to sign and the second to ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, as well as the undeniable results Cuba has achieved in this area, despite the impact of the global economic and financial blockade, which is unjustly imposed on us by the United States. Cuban women today represent 52.3% of advisors and 55.7% of women in the parliament, 66% of technical professionals, more than 81% of teachers, professors, and scientists. More than 70% are working as judges and prosecutors in areas of health and education, and I'm just referring to a few examples. These results and the other challenges we continue to face as we combat discrimination against women so that we can ensure their full equality and empowerment will be amply shown when we defend our 9th periodic report. We are looking very carefully at the list of questions submitted by the committee so that we can provide the most detailed and updated information on the basis of our long history of exchange and cooperation with UN human rights treaty bodies in general and with CEDAW in particular. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba and give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, Chair. Norway attaches great importance to the human rights treaty body system. We value the CEDAW Committee's role in scrutinizing state parties' efforts in implementing the convention, and we thank the committee for your thorough review of Norway's 10th periodic report and for your recommendations. However, we are concerned that many state parties do not submit their periodic reports to CEDAW and other treaty bodies in a timely manner. In this regard, we find it crucial that the reporting burden on states must not be too heavy. We are pleased with the increased use of the simplified reporting procedure. We encourage CEDAW and other treaty bodies to intensify your efforts to harmonize the rules of procedure and working methods, and to coordinate the review cycles. The Chair's role is essential in this context. We urge you to be more ambitious in your efforts to improve and align your working methods. Furthermore, we encourage the committee to focus your questions during dialogue meetings on the most pressing challenges and to allocate sufficient time for the state parties' response. In our view, this would result in more constructive dialogues and more accurate recommendations. Your committee's efforts to improve the situation for women and girls worldwide is closely linked to the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. Norway commends the CEDAW Committee for your contributions to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and to the high-level political forum. The cross-cutting nature of gender equality must be addressed by all stakeholders, and if we neglect to invest in gender equality, we jeopardize the entire 2030 agenda. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Norway. Give the floor to Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Malaysia thanks Ms. Naves for her presentation and commends the work of the committee in ensuring women are protected and not discriminated in any forms. Mr. Chair, Malaysia is fully committed in implementing the provision of CEDAW. We are pleased to inform that we will submit the list of issues and questions raised by the committee based on the 6th periodic report on the implementation of the convention submitted by Malaysia last year by the deadline of 24th of October 2023. Mr. Chair, increasing women's participation in leadership positions remains one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. However, I'm pleased to share that in Malaysia, the statistic of women as corporate decision makers, board of directors for the top 100 public listed companies PLC, and across all PLC as of 1st June 2023 stands at 30.6% and 24.6%. Malaysia stands ready to learn from others and share our best practices on initiatives to enhance the participation of women. Our question to Ms. Naves is as follows. In your opinion, how can the member states increase women's meaningful participation in economy? Could you provide insights on effective practices from any country that perhaps you can share? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. Before giving the floor to the Russian Federation, the next speakers are Colombia and the Sovereign Order of Malta. I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Chair. We wish to thank the Chair of the committee for presenting her report on the activities of the committee. We have several comments as well. We would call upon the committee to stringently adhere to the provisions of the convention. Also, to stay within the framework of 68/268, the resolution on the strengthening of the effectiveness of the functioning of treaty bodies, human rights treaty bodies, that is. Pursuant to paragraph 19 of that resolution, the activities of the treaty bodies should be consonant with the provisions of those relevant conventions, and no new obligations should be created for the states parties. In this regard, we believe that the comments, the general comments voiced by the committee, are the private opinion of its experts. They don't impose on states any additional obligations, in addition to those obligations that were already undertaken when acceding to the international treaties. This directly bears on the comments of the committee as regards recommendation 39 on the rights of women and girls who are from indigenous peoples. We've heard about plans to produce other general recommendations. And we have a hope here. We hope that these projects will be grounded in international law. We hope that they will not create any non-consensus-based recommendations, no non-consensus wording in those recommendations. Once more, we call upon the committee to take into account the burden encountered and efficiently and effectively use the resources allocated to it. We'd ask them to refrain from not using non-consensus-based language in its terminology too. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Give the floor to Colombia.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much for the briefing by the chair of CEDAW. For Colombia, the work of the committee is essential in our commitment to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. In particular, the adoption of Recommendation 39 is a goal which should be welcomed. It will address the specific issues related to cultural diversity and the rights of indigenous women and girls. The work of women's organizations which promoted its adoption should be recognized as well. In addition, indigenous women and girls still face territorial, political, and social inequality. They also bear the burden of unpaid work and domestic work. We must normalize existing strategies and frameworks to acknowledge their rights. There must be plans of action based on human rights and a cross-cutting approach to eliminate all forms of discrimination and violence. While in Colombia we already have begun to address these issues, quite often our efforts fall short, and in the coming years the work on comprehensive data-informed policies will be particularly important for those most in need. Colombia continues to work hard to ensure that the Recommendation 39 will be fully implemented. These strategies should be further encouraged and worked on in the committee over the coming 2 years. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Colombia. Give the floor to the Sovereign Order of Malta.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, all over the world, people are exposed to violence every day. The quantitative figure of these cruel acts, as we all can imagine, is much higher than all official statistics. Among the many victims, the vulnerable, including women and children, are the most affected by these violations of basic human rights. Violence against women and children is a pervasive and global problem that transcends borders and cultures. It is a grave violation of women's rights and a stain to our collective conscience. To effectively address this issue, we must first understand its root causes and the profound consequences it inflicts upon individuals and society as a whole. According to UN Women, a staggering 1 in 3 women worldwide has experienced physical or sexual violence, often at the hands of an intimate partner. This horrifying statistics is a stark reminder of the prevalence and urgency of this issue we face. Furthermore, it is estimated that 17% of girls in the developing world are married before the age of 15, often against their will, in practices that perpetuate cycles of violence and discrimination. In addition to these sobering statistics, the consequences of violence against women and children are devastating. It not only inflicts physical harm, but also leaves lasting emotional and physical scars. It hinders women's participation in the workforce and hampers economic development. It perpetuates cycles of poverty, as children who witness violence are most likely to become perpetrators or victims themselves in the future. Psychological support and women's shelters are just some of the mechanisms used to respond to violence against women and children. To preserve the integrity of those affected, prevention is the most vital subject in this matter. However, the question of how we as an international community can prevent atrocities in the private sphere remains a very difficult one. The Sovereign Order of Malta is a strong supporter of your mandate and is proud to champion specifically the cause of combating trafficking in person and protecting human rights of victims. The Order of Malta echoes your calls for states and international entities, organizations, and individuals to take on their positive obligations to prevent human trafficking and other forms of violence, to enforce accountabilities for the perpetrators and to provide aid to victims. In conclusion, violence against women and children is a scourge that we must confront with unwavering resolve. Let us commit ourselves to building a world where women and children can live free from the threat of violence, where equality and justice prevailed. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Sovereign Order of Malta. That was the last speaker. I now give the floor to the chair of CEDAW, Ms. Ana Perez Narvaez, to respond and for any reaction.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you as well to all of the states parties for comments and questions that you've put to me. I'll attempt to respond to the vast majority of these questions. I've taken note of all of them. Thank you as well for the comments and for the information that you've shared with us, particularly your efforts to move forward with effective gender equality between men and women according to the CEDAW Convention in your respective countries. I'm particularly grateful to Mexico for the very good practice of setting up a specific commission to follow through on the final observations of the CEDAW Committee. So we thank the Mexican State Party for those efforts. You asked me, for example, Japan said, what obligation do we have with other human rights treaty bodies? I did refer to the pilot experience with the Committee on the Rights of the Child and the CEDAW Committee to review back-to-back the work of a state party in Geneva, and it coincided with the period of sessions of a number of human rights treaty bodies. It was a great opportunity, as I said in my statement, to bolster the work between both these treaty bodies so that we could offer much more consistent recommendations to the state with regard to its obligations, in this particular case, its obligations to girls, and to the work that we're doing in the CEDAW Committee. That work is not easy because the calendars and the planning for the sessions of the human rights treaty bodies do not always overlap, and so we don't always get this opportunity. One good practice that the CEDAW Committee has set up is to have focal points within the CEDAW Committee to follow through on the work that is being done by other human rights treaty bodies. For example, we have a focal point with the ICRC, and that's given us an opportunity to work on joint statements on a number of subjects. And turning to the gender perspective issue raised by Greece, throughout the UN system, I think everything has been a challenge. A great deal has been said about intersectionality of gender equality, but we really need to look at what is being implemented. And I think we all face an enormous challenge. On the one hand, in the committee, to provide guidance to states as to how to apply this recommendation, but also within the UN system as a whole. The EU spoke about the issue of health, sexual and reproductive health, and also spoke about gender-based stereotypes in the Beijing Plus 30 review. There are states who are attempting to mitigate these gender-based stereotypes. The next general recommendation of the CEDAW committee is going to be recommendation 41 on gender-based stereotypes, and we know that this is a difficult issue, in particularly in today's environment, where we're dealing with different interpretations. But the CEDAW committee is committed to addressing this new general recommendation, and it will become a real part of the work of the committee as of next year, once the general recommendation 40 has been adopted. The committee has also set up and implemented a working group on gender identity and sexual orientation with regard to the rights of women, and we'll be following that issue as well. Switzerland mentioned women's access to technology, taking into account the issue of cybersecurity, etc. This is a key issue, and we are taking this into account when the committee analyzes the implementation of the recommendation, Article 5 of that convention, in particular with regard to violence. In point of fact, the committee has appointed a focal point for the issue of cyber violence, because this is a particularly important issue. Just a moment, I'm sorry. I'd like to refer to Russia's comments. Namely, that the CEDAW committee should not exceed its own mandate, and that our recommendations should not be personal opinions of our experts. The truth is, and I really regret that the Russian State Party has that opinion about the CEDAW committee. The CEDAW committee knows full well what its mandate is, and we work by consensus on all our decisions. And not only do we do that, but in addition to that, when we publish or adopt general recommendations, we do that after a lengthy consultative process, not just with the states parties, but also with other interested parties. And obviously, they have a clear role to play, and here I welcome the work of civil society and the women's associations from Colombia. I would just conclude with the comments made by Malta on the importance of addressing gender-based violence against women. We see that clearly every day in the work of the committee. In particular, as I said, not only when we've updated General Recommendation 19 and adopted General Recommendation 35, we provided guidance to states on specific issues, and I referred to that earlier, to sexual-based violence in armed conflict, or, for example, other harmful practices. And all of this guidance is offered directly to states on the CEDAW Committee's website as well. Let me conclude just by underscoring 2 points. Currently, the CEDAW Committee is also analyzing internally various possibilities where we can provide assistance to bolster the Convention's mandate on the issue of gender-based violence against women. This is really a key issue in the agenda of the CEDAW Committee, and we trust sincerely, with the support of member states, that we'll be able to make progress in this area. And finally, I just wanted to refer to the fact that the 11th of October is the International Day of the Child, and we will be publishing a declaration on safeguarding life, health, and the future of girls by reducing to a minimum undesired, unwanted pregnancies and ensuring access to safe abortion, which we trust will be useful for states. That's all from me for the time being. Thank you, Chairman, for this opportunity.
I thank the chair of CEDAW. I would now like to welcome the chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, Ms. Dorothy Estrada Tank. Colleagues, again, if you wish to make comments and pose questions to the speakers, please press the microphone button within the next 3 minutes. After that, the list will be closed. The time limit for each speaker will again be announced before the floor is given to the first speaker. I now invite the chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls to make an introductory statement. Ms. Estrada Tank, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente. Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished participants. It is an honor for me to address the General Assembly as chairperson of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls in this fourth oral reporting. Our expert group sincerely appreciates this opportunity to formally connect with the GA through its third committee, alongside the chairperson of the CEDAW committee and the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls. Mr. Chair, I would like to share some highlights from our latest report on gendered inequalities of poverty, feminist and human rights-based approaches, presented to the Human Rights Council last June, as well as our joint report on the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan, submitted to the Council together with the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Afghanistan. Turning to the first report on gender inequalities of poverty. Globally, women and girls are disproportionately represented among those living in poverty. Our thematic report demonstrates that poverty and socioeconomic inequality are the result of blatant systemic failures, leading to a vicious cycle of exclusion and discrimination. The COVID-19 pandemic and other crises have resulted in the first rise in income inequality between countries in a generation, with women and girls being particularly affected in many countries and regions. Women's and girls' inequality and poverty are the result of historical and continuing economic policy choices at the global, regional, and national levels. These policy priorities are not gender neutral, as they have been developed within patriarchal systems that ignore the specific experiences and rights of girls and women, while privileging the dominant forms of male and corporate power that perpetuate existing hierarchies. Poverty is a gendered phenomenon that is deeply imbricated with other forms of inequality. Women's and girls' experiences of poverty intersect with other factors and conditions to produce distinct forms of discrimination and inequality. The recent backlash against gender equality underlines the urgent need to reassert the centrality of the human rights framework and intersectional feminist approaches to tackling poverty and the inequalities that it perpetuates and entrenches. Alongside its role in exacerbating existing inequalities, at the same time, COVID-19 crisis has also prompted a reevaluation of mainstream economic ideologies, including the recognition of the central role of care in our societies, as well as revaluing the state's position as an actor in defining and resourcing public policies. The current moment, therefore, presents an opportunity to revisit concept of unlimited economic growth, often based on deeply embedded forms of discrimination, transnational economic inequality, failure to fulfill international solidarity obligations of assistance and cooperation, and non-existent or insufficient networks of social protection and public services to guarantee universally recognized rights, such as health, water, housing, food and nutrition, education, a clean and healthy environment, and access to justice. Crucially, poverty and inequality are not inevitable. As one woman put it, we are not poor, we are being impoverished. Most mainstream approaches to gender and poverty focus on a small number of economic rights associated with work, financial inclusion, and women's entrepreneurship, rather than analyzing the systems of power that generate and reproduce unequal gender relations within families, communities, institutions, and markets. These dominant models fail to recognize the value of women's unpaid care and the domestic and agricultural work of women which secure the economy. Social movements advocating for transformative change from the perspective of feminist political economy and human rights have drawn attention to the existence of alternatives to unjust economic and social policies and institutions. Thus, the report calls for a feminist human rights-based economy that enables and constructs substantive equality, solidarity, and socioeconomic and environmental justice. To do this, we ask to implement our recommendations made to you, states, individually and also acting within international economic institutions, to those institutions themselves and to corporations. Among them, 1, to take measures for the just redistribution of wealth and resources and a shift away from excessive consumption, production, and extraction towards an equitable global trade order, tax and debt justice, corporate accountability, and the realization of the right to development with gender equality at the core. 2, to ensure the inclusive and minimal participation of diverse groups of women and girls in implementing socioeconomic strategies to realize the right to be free from poverty and to substantive equality. 3, given the rapidly approaching deadline for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and noting the slow progress on SDGs 1, 5, and 10, to reiterate the centrality of women's and girls' human rights and gender equality to processes of poverty eradication and to reducing inequalities both within and between nations. We have the opportunity to reconsider the economic model and to prioritize social justice, human rights, and women and girls, the half of humanity, at the center. Your Excellencies, moving now to the joint report on the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan, prepared by the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in that country and our working group. While the gender backlash is global, the extreme situation of institutionalized inequality and gender-based discrimination in Afghanistan is unparalleled anywhere in the world. Our report detailed how women and girls are systematically discriminated against in every aspect of their lives. Since taking power in August 2021, the de facto authorities have relentlessly issued edict after edict, of which the vast majority restrict the rights of women and girls, including their rights to education, work, health, access to justice, and freedom of movement, attire, and behavior. A former university student told us, all girls and women in this country live under house arrest. We feel depressed and hopeless, we have no future. This oppressive context and the uncertainty in the future, together with extreme poverty, are placing extreme pressures on women and their families. Despite these challenges, women persist and resist. They continue to work in any way that they can to care for and seek education for their children, and they continue to find spaces to demand respect. This severe deprivation of fundamental rights of women and girls gives rise to a critical concern that women and girls are being targeted for gender persecution, a grave international human rights violation and a crime against humanity. The systemic, institutionalized discrimination and oppression they are subjected to also reveals a pattern of gender apartheid, which we are asking to be further developed normatively and through practical tools for its eradication and prevention elsewhere. Respect for women's and girls' human rights and the restoration of the rule of law in Afghanistan are critical. Without them, women are sentenced to lives ruled by tyranny and to existence where they are, as one woman put it, alive but not living. Finally, Afghan women and girls urgently need the unwavering commitment and concrete actions from the international community, including the support of Afghan women-led organizations. We cannot turn a blind eye on the atrocity committed there, and we have a collective responsibility to act now before it is too late. I thank you.
I thank the chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. I will now open the floor for questions or comments to Ms. Estrada Tank. I would ask delegations to limit their comments to 3 minutes. I will now read out the list of the first 5 speakers: Spain, United States, Brazil, Dominican Republic, and Slovenia. I give the floor to Spain.
Madam, we welcome the work of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, and we thank Ms. Dorothy Estrada Tank for her brief, and we've taken note with appreciation of your report on gender disequality and inequality and poverty. In point of fact, poverty is more than the result of the lack of income. It is a flagrant systemic failure as a result of discrimination and exclusion. It has an environmental and political context and impacts present and future generations. We see it in the policies of international economic institutions and in national governments, which have further led to greater poverty and inequality. This is due to a patriotic system, slavery, colonialism, discrimination, militarism, destruction of the environment. These have all been exacerbated by orthodox macroeconomist approaches such as certain structural adjustment programs. We acknowledge your mention of menstrual poverty in your report. Madam Chair, Spain has a feminist foreign policy. We have as a priority guaranteeing economic justice for all women, and that is why Spain, with Mexico, has headed the coalition on the justice and rights for women. We have set a roadmap for achieving these goals. We'd like to know how a feminist economy based on human rights can help put an end to inequality and poverty for women and girls. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Spain and give the floor to the U.S.
Thank you. We thank the working group for its continued efforts to report widespread discrimination against women and girls in all their diversity. The Biden-Harris administration believes that advancing gender equity and equality is fundamental to every individual's safety, health, financial security, and ability to fully exercise their human rights. Collectively, we are facing growing, sustained, and coordinated attacks on the rights and freedoms of women and girls, members of the LGBTQI+ community, racial, ethnic, and religious minorities, migrants, and ultimately, all of us who believe in an open, pluralistic, and inclusive society. Evidence gathering is critical to combating anti-rights and anti-gender movements around the world. We hope in your next report on taking stock of the last 6 years will address the negative effects of anti-rights and anti-gender movements on the advancement of gender equity and equality. We encourage you to further explore the negative effects of these movements on the empowerment of women and girls as outlined in Sustainable Development Goal 5. We encourage the working group to continue its efforts. Creating opportunity for all individuals fosters peace, security, and prosperity. Our question is, how will the working group address anti-rights movements and global backsliding on gender equality? Thank you.
Thank the distinguished representative of the United States and give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, I thank and commend you for your oral report, as well as report A/HRC/53/39 that you submitted to the Human Rights Council last June. Brazil shares your view that reduction of socioeconomic inequalities is a requirement for effective action against poverty. We also agree on the importance of adopting comprehensive and structural measures based on a feminist approach and on the core human rights principles of equality, non-discrimination, socioeconomic and environmental justice, and solidarity, in order to ensure that women and girls live free from poverty. We are also of the view that in order to be truly transformative, such multidimensional actions must guarantee meaningful participation of women. Several of the measures recommended in your report are a priority in Brazil, such as gender-responsive social protection mechanisms. Some are even enshrined in our constitution, such as universal and free-of-charge access to health. Among the positive measures to eliminate poverty and achieve substantive equality, highlighted in your report, is that of the realization of the right to care. Since Brazil is now designing a national policy of care based on a whole-of-government and whole-of-society approach, we would be grateful if you could share good practices in that regard. Thank you.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.